This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it. Guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Children and grown-ups, really, to be curious about their own senses, to be curious about the things that they're experiencing, to be more mindful and to be present in the things that they're consuming, whether that is food, which is what we're specifically talking about, or just content in general. You're more likely to make better decisions for yourself if you are open to the idea of going, well, why does it taste like this? Why does it feel like this? Why does it smell like this? You go one step further to any one of those questions, and the world just opens up tremendously.
Welcome to the Parent Footprint Podcast with Dr. Dan. I am Dr. Dan, your host, and let me tell you about our mission at Parent Footprint. And that mission is to make the world a more loving and compassionate place, one parent and one child at a time. We believe the key to raising happy, healthy, and engaged kids is for us parents to seek the same in our own lives: happiness, health, and engagement. Further, we believe that awareness is the foundation for your vision of successful parenting. And with increased awareness and intention, we can be purposeful about leaving a healthy footprint on our children. Today's show is titled Helping Picky Eaters with our guest, Sarah Thomas. Sarah is the co-founder and chief imaginator for Kalamata's Kitchen, a global franchise helping kids learn about cultures through adventures with food. She's authored the Kalamata book series with renowned chefs, developed the Taste Bud Travel Guide, hosted live tasting events for kids across the U.S., and attracted celebrity taste buds from everywhere. She recently launched a free kitchen exploration passport to help keep kids adventuring in the kitchen during this pandemic. Sarah spent her childhood surrounded by good food, books, and entertainment, and she holds a pre-med degree as well as literature and politics, and a master's degree in English Renaissance literature. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, speaking of adventures, let's start with your adventure to being the chief imaginator of Kalamata's Kitchen and your journey to this area of interest and passion.
Sure. It's a sort of winding road, so I hope that's okay. I grew up the child of South Indian immigrants. I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, though. I was born and raised in a small town there. And it wasn't a hugely diverse area, so I really centered my identity in my family's Indian culture and the way that sort of fit in with the world around me. My mom and my dad are tremendous cooks and entertainers. And I know that, I grew up sort of loving two things, which were food and reading. So I could often be found sitting, we had a pretty big open kitchen. I could often be found reading at the table or sometimes under the table and my mom just cooked all the time. So some of my earliest formative memories are of the sounds and the smells of the kitchen. And they really provide this beautiful color and context for a lot of my memories. And I left there and went to college intending to be pre-med. I ended up doing literature, politics, working in between undergrad and grad school in a school in India for intellectually disabled children. I then pursued my master's degree in literature because I had this drive to teach. But as I finished it, realized it wasn't the kind of teaching I wanted to do. So came back to do medicine again. And while I was starting that process over with a post-bac, I also decided to start working in restaurants just because I wanted to, because it seemed fun and I loved food. And in restaurants, I started as a bartender in Pittsburgh. And in restaurants, I sort of discovered what I was actually good at, which was retaining a huge amount of knowledge, translating it to people in a way that was comfortable and fun and exciting for them. So I loved, I suddenly realized I could create experiences for people through food. And that's when this sort of hospitality bug bit me hard. And I dove headfirst into the most academic part of the industry that I could identify, which was wine. I decided to become a sommelier, and I'm now an advanced sommelier in the Court of Master Sommeliers. I was in the restaurant industry for about 10 years, 5 of which were spent at Le Bernardin in New York City, which is a 3 Michelin star restaurant, very wine focused, very fine dining. And that's when I met my business partner, Derek Wallace, who we became immediate friends because we bonded over our shared loves of food and travel and what food had meant for us in our lives. And he came to me with this idea while I was working at Le Bernardin he said, what if we could create a character that could take children on these adventures and be the character that connected children to the world through the medium of food, but from their perspective? Do you think that's a good idea? And I was like, yeah, I think that's a really good idea. So what you're telling me is you just came up with my dream job, something I couldn't have possibly imagined doing for myself because I hadn't considered that angle.
Food and books.
Food and books, and teaching and storytelling and creating experiences. And so he likes to joke that he had to beg me on this phone call to be part of it, to help him build it. And that is so far from the truth. I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to be part of it.
He had you at hello, as they say.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. And so from that point on, we've been together. We've been sort of building this brand, building these characters, building these stories, creating great partnerships, creating experiences for children. And it's a very fast moving train. It's a lot has happened very quickly, and I am thrilled about it.
What are any of the surprises of what's happened so quickly in terms of response and what's working and connecting?
Yeah, I mean, for specific, what we've heard time and time again in some of the meetings that we've had with partners, such as our current partners like Imagine Entertainment, who are producing our animated series coming up, and Penguin Random House, who are obviously global leaders in publishing. And what we've heard in meetings with partners like them, is that they look at what we've produced in a short amount of time and they say, you guys, this just doesn't happen. It's the speed at which we've been able to enact a lot of the things that we've wanted to do, such as creating tasting experiences around the country for children, such as releasing 3 books in under 2 years, such as connecting with some of the professional taste buds, as we call them, in the food world, like Padma, Lakshmi and Chrissy Tiegen and Eric Ripert. It's all, I think, a testament to the fact that people really connect with the message and the heart of Kalamata's Kitchen. Which is really centered, and this is why I really love your intro and your podcast, because it's really centered around children becoming curious, compassionate, and courageous citizens of the world, and being able to share that voyage and that experience of understanding with their parents.
And so timely with everything that's going on in the world now about compassion and awareness and change, right? And creating change and through food and culture, right? So tell us about, how do the kids? Tell us about the characters, the key character, then how they identify through these stories that gives them this increased awareness and love.
Sure. Well, what we know, and what we can all observe is that kids learn. We all learn through stories, but kids particularly learn through stories where characters really speak to them. And so our central characters, are Kalamata herself, who is this again curious, courageous, compassionate little girl who has a huge appetite for adventure. The way she experiences the world is through all of her senses. So the scents and the flavors and the sights and even the textures of food really excite her, and they awake her imagination. And in her imagination, she can go anywhere. She can be transported by the power of her own imagination with the prompt of a beautiful sensory experience with food to anywhere in the world. She meets people, she tastes food, she smells things, she experiences life through this medium. And along her sidekick on all of these adventures is her stuffed alligator pal, Al Dente, who has a voracious appetite for all things and often finds himself getting into very silly situations. And what we found is that kids just, they look at them, and first of all, they're just really, I know I'm a little biased, obviously, but they're just really cute characters. They're just really cute. Kalamata has this big, beautiful hair and big eyes and a sort of like mischievous little smile on her face all the time. And Al Dente, if you page through the books, you'll see him sort of sneaking off with armfuls of snacks. And one of the most fun things to do for kids is to like find what Al Dente is doing on each page. And so, to get back to the question is, how do kids connect with this? Kids love stories. Kids love characters. Kids love characters who are doing fun, silly things, who aren't overtly teaching them any lessons, right? Like a kid can smell a lesson coming from a mile away. But oftentimes just seeing Kalamata trying something new for the first time is enough to get a kid to say, you know what? I think I'll try that for the first time too. And it's not because Kalamata said I should. It's just because she did it. So, there's a spread in our first book where Kalamata is experiencing what a pink guava is for the first time. And the first story is essentially about making a cake with a meringue frosting on top. And the feedback that we got from parents who read that book is that page where she has her big eyes in like right behind a beautiful illustrated piece of pink guava, every single kid latches onto that page, and rather than making the cake, they all want to try a guava. And I'm like, well, there you go. We're getting them to try make healthier decisions for themselves, and we didn't even really set out to do it that time, but it really made me think for future books.
Yes. So in terms of, I have a taste bud question for you. It seems, it's in my experience in working with our clients and then also raising my own kids who were also picky eaters, do we have an increase in picky eaters, versus the earlier generations? Like, is this a phenomenon, and what do you make of it?
Well, I know how I grew up, which is that I didn't really have a ton of choice about what I was eating. I don't know if that's like specifically a cultural thing or my parent thing, but when I tried to explain the concept of picky eaters to my mom, she was like, I don't understand. I just don't. What do you mean they don't eat things? Like you put the food in front of them, they eat it. She just didn't get it because we just weren't, we didn't grow up that way. And so, I can only use my own experience here. I'm not a parent. I just happen to be a kid who did experience the world this way and was excited to try new things, simply because I think this is what I believe very firmly, is that the way my parents presented things to me and was really important. There was never, I don't remember a moment where my parents would say, okay, this is new and different and you might not like it and it might be a little spicy and it might be, they never prefaced anything. They were like, here's dinner. And then I liked or didn't like it, but I didn't have strong stances that are like, I just won't eat these things. And I do think that a lot of that came from the way ideas were presented. So one of the things we like to say is that we don't really believe in picky eaters per se. We just wonder whether perhaps if the perspective were flipped a little bit on how the things were presented to children, they might not have the sort of immediate reaction of, well, it's unfamiliar, I don't want it. And certainly, we don't know that our characters or stories can like immediately make your kid want to eat broccoli. But what we do know is that presenting some of these things around, rather than focusing on, say, a specific food, flipping the perspective on just the adventure of trying something new has been really effective in the events that we've done and the engagement that we've had with our characters.
Yeah, so it's a different approach, right? It's hey, Kalamata and Al Dente are they're on this adventure. Doesn't this look good? As opposed to, you need to eat this, or why don't you eat this?
Yeah, it is a little bit. And also, again, the emphasis is not really on the food itself. It's on the fact that Kalamata tries something. It's the adventure of trying. And adventures are fun. So trying is fun. And so, again, I try really hard. I mean, I used to do this honestly with adults in a way, when I would be trying to get somebody to try a kind of wine or a pairing that was outside of their comfort zone. It's just like a presentation of like the idea of being adventurous is an attractive one, and particularly for children, when you have a role model that you like that is also like that's one of her defining traits. It seems to be an attractive perspective for a lot of kids. One of the things that we do along those lines is we create passports for children, where we, and when we were able, and we will in the future, go to sort of cities around the country and do tasting events. We give each child a passport, and in the passport are different vendors who are presenting different little bites of food. And we tell kids, if they just try it, they don't have to like it. They can tell us if they didn't like it or didn't. They just have to try the food. And if they try it, they get a stamp. If they finish all their stamps in their passport, they get a prize. And we just and we're like, all right, that's it, go. So we send them on their little food tasting adventure. And what we found is that by not making a big deal about the foods themselves that they're trying, but also saying, hey, we're just sending you on this adventure to go and try stuff. They want to do it. It puts the agency in their hands, and there's no adult being like, you have to try this because you have to try it. It's the agency, and the idea is theirs. As soon as the idea is theirs, it's like parents, literally their jaws just drop when they see their kids eating what they eat at some of our events.
So I'm interested in, so a few words that you've talked about. One is to nurture curiosity, and the other is compassion. So first off, I love the idea of our kids being curious, right? It kind of open up instead of being closed off and restricted and scared and all of that stuff. And draw the parallel for us to compassion. How do we increase compassion through food?
Well, I think it's such a big question, honestly,
Yes.
because I think there's so much opportunity, first of all, for food just as a medium for kids and grown-ups alike to be transporting, to introduce us to not just new flavors and sensorial sort of experiences, but the people behind them. And I think that itself is sort of a gateway to understanding cultures that are not your own, cultures that you may not have been exposed to as a child or as a grown-up before interacting with this food. The stories of people who might seem on the surface so different from you, when you start to dive into, when you have this curiosity around food, you start to dive into the fact that the things you grew up with, no matter where you grew up or how you grew up, there's another culture that seems completely foreign to yours right now that probably has very, very similar, sort of textures, foods, mindsets behind what's presented, the idea of comfort food. So that's one aspect of it. And a sort of bigger level idea behind that is that I think just encouraging children and grown-ups really to be curious about their own senses, to be curious about the things that they're experiencing, to be more mindful and to be present in the things that they're consuming, whether that is food, which is what we're specifically talking about, or just content in general. You're more likely to make better decisions for yourself if you are open to the idea of going, well, why does it taste like this? Why does it feel like this? Why does it smell like this? You go one step further to any one of those questions, and the world just opens up tremendously. And it goes back to what I said earlier about that being then the gateway to learning about the stories, lives, cultures, traditions of other people. The possibilities there are just endless. Even if you ask just one of those questions, why does it smell like this? Well, it has nutmeg in it. What is nutmeg? What does the tree look like? Where does it grow? What are the things, like, where is this traditionally used? I mean, it's really, truly an endless, beautiful dive into a body of knowledge.
Yeah, and that's a great way of looking at it. I mean, the going to the depth and the inquisitiveness of where do these things come from, and why do they have these textures, and why do they have these tastes, and why do we like some things and not like other things, and what does that say about who we are as individuals, and can we change, as parents? Like, what is something that you didn't like? I know for me, I hated eggs when I was growing up. I love eggs now, right? I don't know what happened, but it's not like we're stuck with the palate, right? I mean, your whole point is
So true.
like it can all change.
It's so true. And I'll share a personal story that is very funny to a lot of people because of where I ended up working. But when I was growing up, I was sort of, and this is what is a great example of perspective, is this is the one place where my parents did sort of lead me into disliking something that I end up really liking. Growing up in India, you don't eat, either meat or fish that is raw or undercooked in any way, right? It's just not in part of the cuisine usually. And so even growing up here, I remember my parents being incredibly wary of sushi and sashimi and like beef tartare and stuff like that, they were just like, don't eat it, you might die. I was like, all right, and my mom would be like, you're not going to like the texture of it anyway. It's, it's slimy or something like that, and I just remember being like, all right, I'm not going to like it. And I never tried it until I went to college. And that's really wild to a lot of people because obviously I ended up working at Libertadine, which is like one of the world's most famous seafood restaurants. But I did not like fish unless it was like fried with a ton of spices blanketing it. That's the only way I liked it. Like if it was an Indian preparation, I would eat any kind of fish, but I was very wary of it otherwise. And that's to me, a great example of like, just, parents often not realizing the unconscious biases that they pass on to their children. Both of my parents, for the record, now love sushi, but so they figured it out too. But those things are really, I think, very often unwittingly and unknowingly and consciously passed on by parents. And then it takes so much work to get over it when you get older. I had to work to make myself like it, and I do now. But it was work. I wanted to like it.
And that great message for all of our listeners is because, of course, one of the main missions of our show is about increasing awareness and us being aware of what we are passing down intentionally and unintentionally to our kids. So, any comment about food, it sticks, and I want to draw a little parallel here, or make a little leap here in terms of what we say. It's also this. Food and body image have become so connected. Do you have, how do you think about how to create the connection with food and healthy body images, given what's a lot of the media that I think does the opposite these days?
That's a great question. I'm certainly not an expert in these fields, but my personal feeling is that, again, what I said before about children being, if they're engaged in what they're consuming, they're more likely to make better decisions for themselves. I feel like there's a lot of research around that, dealing with food and really dealing with a lot of other things as well. It's when kids are more conscious, when they're more in tune with their own senses, they can more naturally understand and listen to their own bodies. And also that curiosity, again, engages them in order to make those better decisions for themselves. And I do think that that's really important for food. In terms of presenting stories and characters where that is, where I feel like that is, we try so hard to just translate the joy and positivity that surrounds food in so many different aspects. And I do think that that's emotional, and I do think that that's physical, because when you speak about food nourishing, it's not just for sustenance, right? Food is comfort, but food is joy, and food is love. And when people feel kind of love and energy through food and through stories around food, I think that does lead to overall health. In terms of presenting, the idea is, I think a healthy curiosity about all of these things is what leads to good decisions. I think about specifically how, people like Anthony Bourdain shaped my generation of eaters, right? Is that like he dove so deeply, not just into what he was eating, but the people behind it. And I think that when you start to see positive examples of people all over the world who look completely different from you, engaging with their food in the way that they do, and then further with their families, you start to realize that there are so many beautiful, healthy examples to be found in real life that I think are so much more interesting and engaging and meaningful than a lot of what's portrayed in the media. So one of the things we try to do also is center the idea of your heroes don't have to be celebrities and athletes. They certainly can be, and musicians, but food gives you the opportunity to see leadership and team building and positive examples in the people who are just feeding you, right? Like, imagine how powerful it would be if you started to see the positive examples of the people feeding you lunch at school, how they look, how they translate their energy, the people who are serving you, your food in restaurants, how they look. It's a much more diverse, in every sense of the word, example of what people look like and how they behave around food and with food and through food.
Yeah, it's a broader conversation, basically, is what you're saying. Because even as I'm thinking about my next question that I want to ask you is not a broad question, and I think you're going to take it in that direction, and that is, a lot of the advice that parents get about picky eaters, I'm going to oversimplify in two camps. One is make enough options of food so your child has some choice, right? So they're not forced to eat anything, but that they have choice to expand their palate and start to own their decisions. And another one is more like old school, like you were raised, like I was raised, which is like, this is for dinner, right? Like, this is what we're having. So do you, that seems too, almost too black and white, for lack of a better word, like too extreme. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
It's a really interesting point. And I kind of know what I've lived, and then I kind of know what I've seen through Kalamata's kitchen. And I think, there is this sort of middle ground in this, in that there are ways, if you want to, if your way is to introduce a lot of options, I know that one of the pieces of advice is to be consistent with reintroducing things. Like, children's taste buds are so different from adult taste buds. And if they don't like it the first time or even 10 times, doesn't mean they're never going to like it. So, I know that a lot of people have struggled to reintroduce foods because they're just like, well, they feel like they're beating their heads against a wall. And then on the other hand, it's like, well, if I only make one thing and my kid refuses to eat it, then I'm like, what am I, starving my kid? And I really feel for parents who are getting all of these sort of this conflicting advice, because I don't know. I don't have my own children, so I can imagine just that pressure, especially if you didn't grow up being mindful around food and wanting to do that now for your child. I can imagine that pressure is just immense. And I think that there are ways that parents can be, that can sort of integrate both things, which is to say, for example, that you're going to have this oatmeal, for example, for breakfast, and this is what you're going to have, but we're going to stir a unique spice into it today, and we're just going to, just see what happens and see what sticks. And there's ways that you can sort of like introduce little things here and there without too much presentation, honestly, to just see what sticks and what doesn't. Because a lot of times, I think, again, it goes back to how things are presented to children. If it's like, all right, we're going to try this tonight, like, I think that sometimes children are just wary of that. I think sometimes they're just like, you know what, that attitude has made me not want to try it. But just putting something in and just seeing how it goes is one thing that we've seen has been really, honestly, very successful, because then it leads to like a kid looking at their parent and going, why does it taste like this? This isn't what I thought it was going to taste like. And again, leads to that engagement that we talked about sooner. So, I'm certainly, not an expert in terms of the psychology around it. I can just speak to what I've lived and what I've seen, but I've seen that be a really successful sort of middle ground for a lot of parents to reach.
So basically it all comes down to this curiosity and the story and the inquiry and the adventure as a way to open kids up to food.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. I think that if we can, again, going back to that idea of trying things being the real adventure, not the food itself, I think that if we can get kids to say that trying things is fun, and adventures are fun and trying is an adventure, I think that's key. That's core to what we're trying to achieve.
So if you could recommend one thing to the parent listening right now, one thing in terms of for them to focus on to help their picky eater become less picky over time, what would you say?
It's a great question. I mean, for one thing, I guess I would encourage people to engage their children in the whys of why they like or dislike certain things. And I think it's important to talk about both sides of that. Why do you like and why do you dislike certain things? And don't let it, and I think when I say engage, I mean really, like, don't let things like because it's yummy or because it's yucky sort of slide as answers. See if you can engage in things like, well, what does it feel like? What do you like about how it feels? Did it crunch? Did it make noises when you ate it? Does the smell remind you of anything? Have you ever seen anything this color before? Engaging questions like that get kids sort of out of the easy sort of silos of yuck and yum. And I really think that engagement is so critical, and I think really effective for a lot of parents and a lot of kids.
Nice. And I like that, getting outside of the yuck and the yum, right? Like, let's expand the conversation.
Yeah. And I mean, also just to add on really quick to that is like expanding the vocabulary of food, right, outside of yuck and yum is really fun. You get to start, you become really creative with the ways that you describe things, and it's fun for adults too, right? Like you can't like taste sunshine, but you know what you're saying if someone says, "Oh my God, this dish is so sunny," and so like introducing the like words and feelings and into the vocabulary around describing food, it's really fun. It gets kids excited. It is itself a sort of storytelling device.
Yes. Okay. Before you tell us more about your stories and where people can find them, we are going to have the Parent Footprint Moment question.
Great.
Okay. So tell us about a time that you became more aware of yourself as a person, as a parent, which you are not, or of awareness of your parents, and that new awareness had a positive impact on your life.
So it's not specifically around a parent relationship. My parent moment, weirdly enough, but it is an adult-child relationship, where the very first time I read Kalamata's Kitchen to a classroom, to students. They were about, I think, 5 years old in this classroom. There was a little girl, also of Indian descent, who was sitting right in front of me, and I held up the book, and I was introducing Kalamata and Al Dente, and she points at the cover, and she looks at me, and she goes, "Wow, Kalamata looks a lot like you." And I said, "No, she looks a lot like you." And her eyes just lit up, and it was so powerful because she's now going to grow up in a time when she's going to see a lot more characters who she can relate to because they look like her, and also that she can relate to because of their wonderful character traits. And I didn't have that growing up. There was no visual representation of characters that looked like me, and she was so excited. She kept turning to her friends and saying, "Did you hear that? She said she looks like me." And I like barely held it together while I was reading this book. And then I left that room and I went outside of the parking lot and I called my mom and I just cried. And I was just like, I can't. It just like really hit me. I knew that it was important to create a character that kids that look like me could relate to and see themselves in. And it like that moment really galvanized it for me. Like seeing it in action, and furthermore, seeing all the other kids who, primarily in that classroom, it was primarily white children, also looking at Kalamata and seeing a little. It's so important for kids to just see other kids that don't look like themselves also as heroes, friends, and inspirations. And that was, it was so. I'm like getting emotional just thinking about it.
Yeah, I have the chills. I mean, just thinking about being validated. I mean, and how the dominant culture always experiences that, and your experience of not having that mirror, and to be able to give that to someone at such a young age, that's awesome. It's awesome.
It was beautiful.
and it's so impactful for you at your adult age.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I was a mess. I'm still a mess thinking about it.
That's good. It's so important. Okay. So Sarah, you have a lot to share with the world. We have the Taste Bud Travel Guide. We have the Kalamata book series, the Kids Kitchen Gear, and the tasting tour. Tell us where everyone can find this stuff.
Well, I would say your best resource right now is to go to www.kalamataskitchen.com. That's where you'll find all of the information we have, our shop as well. We have a lot of really fun free resources for parents, like downloadable versions of our passports, since we're not currently doing our tasting events due to closures, but those will resume as well, and you'll be able to find information about that on our website as well. And for the sort of really current stuff that we're doing in terms of sometimes we do like sort of live chats on Instagram and story readings, I would say go to our Instagram as well, and our Facebook. And so that's on both. It's just at Kalamata's Kitchen. And yeah, I mean, I'm really looking forward to people using. We're continuously adding and building out the resources on our website, and I'm really looking forward to people being able to visit the website and really use it as a resource for families.
And congratulations on your success. This is such an important topic, and the approach is such a holistic and, it's such a meaningful approach to increasing, again, compassion, increasing awareness, increasing a palate. And as you say, if kids can make good decisions now, they're going to be able to make good decisions their entire life. So important.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, everyone, that concludes our show with Sarah Thomas about helping picky eaters, a wonderful, holistic, healthy approach. You know, the key for all of us is to try to be the person we want our child to become. Our kids are always watching. We need to think about what we're saying, what we're doing, and being intentional and purposeful as much as possible. And of course, being compassionate with ourselves when we find ourselves being human. Check us out at our website, www.parentfootprint.com. Tell others who would want to hear this information about our show. Please subscribe. And as always, ask yourself this guiding question: what footprint do you want to leave?